If you've been scrolling through endless spec sheets, watching video after video, and still feel stuck wondering which high-end laptop actually lets you edit, render, and game without breaking a sweat, this review is here to clear that up. I spent a few days taking the Acer ConceptD 3 Ezel out of the box, running a couple of Photoshop projects, a short Premiere edit, and even a few indie game builds just to see where the experience feels smooth and where it starts to wobble. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the kind of person who ends up buying a machine like this. You're probably a visual creator, photographer, motion designer, 3D artist who also enjoys a bit of gaming on the side. You need a display that shows color accurately, you want a stylus that feels native, and you don't want to lug around a desktop tower just to get the GPU power you need. At the same time, you're not looking to spend a small fortune on a workstation that's overkill for a 14-inch screen. The ConceptD 3 Ezel tries to sit right at that intersection. The first thing I noticed when opening the lid is the 14-inch IPS panel protected by Gorilla Glass 5. It's not a 4K screen, but the factory-calibrated Pantone validation and 100% sRGB coverage make it a solid choice for color-critical work. In practice, when I opened a Photoshop file shot in RAW, the gradients looked clean and the skin tones stayed true without having to add a calibration strip. That said, the resolution is still 1920x1080, so if you're used to 4K laptops for video work, you'll find yourself zooming a bit more often. The trade-off is a lighter chassis and longer battery life, which is a real win for someone who likes to hop between coffee shops and client meetings. Now, the convertible hinge. Acer calls it Ezel, and it genuinely feels more like a flexible drafting board than a clunky laptop hinge. You can set it into 3 distinct modes: laptop, stand, and tablet. When I switched to stand mode for a Premiere timeline, the screen tilted back at a comfortable angle, freeing up the keyboard for shortcuts while keeping my wrist at a natural height. In tablet mode, the Wacom AES 1.0 pen slipped on the glass with a respectable 8,192 pressure levels. I was able to doodle directly onto a sketch in Clip Studio Paint, and the latency felt comparable to a dedicated drawing tablet. For creators who need that kind of tactile feedback on the go, the built-in pen is a genuine value add. Performance-wise, the 10th Gen i7-10750H paired with a GTX 1650 Max-Q gives you a surprising amount of headroom for a 14-inch chassis. In my day-to-day workflow running Photoshop with dozens of layers, a 1080p Premiere sequence, and a couple of After Effects compositions, the laptop stayed responsive. Rendering a 30-second 1080p clip took roughly the same time as my older 15-inch workstation, thanks to the 6 cores and turbo boost up to 5 GHz. The GTX 1650 isn't a beast for AAA gaming at high settings, but it runs indie titles and older games smoothly at medium-high settings. If you're planning to push the latest titles at 1440p or 4K, you'll feel the limitation quickly. For creators who only need a GPU for acceleration in Adobe's suite, the card is more than adequate. Storage and memory are where the machine feels a bit tight. The 16GB of DDR4 RAM is soldered, so you can't upgrade later. For most Photoshop and video editing tasks, that's fine, but if you regularly work with 4K footage or massive 3D scenes, you may start to see the system swap to the SSD. Speaking of the SSD, the 512GB PCIe NVMe drive gives you fast load times, but it fills up quickly when you store raw footage alongside a collection of large project files. I found myself offloading older projects to an external drive after a week of heavy use. If you're comfortable managing external storage, the internal capacity is acceptable. Otherwise, consider a model with a larger drive. Thermals are worth mentioning because a thin convertible often struggles with heat. Under sustained load, say, a long Premiere export, the fans spin up noticeably, and the chassis gets warm to the touch around the keyboard area. It never throttles dramatically, but you'll hear the fans more than you might expect in a quiet cafe. If you plan to do marathon rendering sessions, a cooling pad would make the experience more pleasant. On the flip side, the fan noise is far less intrusive than many other thin gaming laptops I've tested, so it's a manageable compromise. Battery life is another hidden trade-off. Acer quotes around 8 hours, and that's about what I got when I was browsing the web, answering emails, and sketching with the pen. Once I fired up a GPU-accelerated render, The runtime dropped to roughly 3 hours. This is typical for a laptop that packs a discrete GPU, but it's something to keep in mind if you expect a full day of heavy work away from an outlet. The 14-inch form factor does help keep the battery pack lighter, which contributes.